Welcome back to another episode of Synchronous. My name is Charles Van from Bluebird Entertainment, joined by my co-host, indie blues rock artist, Chase Walker. How's it going, Chase?
Going good. Glad to be back. Charles, how you doing?
Doing good. We had a great session last time unpacking a lot of the current trends in sync and wanted to continue that thread. And Chase, we haven't talked much about, but as you and I, purveyors of all types of contents and shows, everyone who is in the know, looking at a certain period piece, if you will, if a show is happening current day and you have a flashback montage scene to the 80s or 90s, that piece of music is going to have to be authentic to that period. So wanted to set the stage, Chase, and open it up to you with, some nuggets or insights on when you recorded your most recent singles and you were at the NAMM show looking at gear. What are some things you do to really capture that vintage blues rock lane of what you're doing? Any kind of go-to plugins or effects pedals you go to, and talk about that with respect to sync?
Yeah, so I'm not like a huge gearhead in that respect. I'm kind of just recently getting into the world of analog outboard hardware, so to speak. So analog hardware compressors, preamps, stuff like that. A lot of what I do in the studio is entirely in the box, which means it's all done with emulations on the computer. But a lot of what I'm doing is analog emulation based, and I try to, as much as possible, unless there's something that I've screwed up with the recording process, I try to only use analog based plugins. But in that respect, I am noticing a trend in the gear market toward recreating a lot of these vintage analog pieces. And I think a lot of that is being reinforced by the fact that there's a lot of classic music revival happening right now in several different genres, right? There's people who are kind of trying to bring back the sound of the 80s. There are people who are trying to bring back the sound of the 70s. There are people who are trying to bring back the sound of the 50s. It's all across the board right now. And so with that, there's a market for people who want the stuff that really sounds like the vintage stuff, but doesn't cost you, $500,000 for a microphone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a really great time, honestly, right now, to be getting into that world, because there's so much available that can allow you to get that $1 million sound on an indie artist's budget. A lot of the plugins that I use are, like I said, analog emulation, particularly from Waves and Universal Audio. Those are the two, and I'm sure everyone out there who's been messing with plugins is familiar with those two. They're kind of the big dogs on campus. But they're the ones that I've noticed really deep dive into how these pieces of hardware are supposed to function and how to recreate that in a digital format.
Very cool. And with respect to your lyrics, or your vocals rather, typically, what do you run your vocals through? And because a key point that, with sync is making sure any effects you use it sparingly, so it doesn't mess with what's happening with the dialogue of the actors.
Definitely. I think, especially as I've been getting into the world of outboard gear, I've been hearing a lot of talk about people, putting heavy emphasis on what's the vocal chain, what's the chain of things. Really, what it comes down to is the if you think of it as like a sculptor, right? If you're sculpting a mix, the shape of that sculpture is how you've recorded it, what EQs you put on it, and what compression you put on it. That creates the shape. The color that you then, it's a painted sculpture, comes down to the tape and the console. So where I like to start is by having that color in mind and playing into that color with the shape, so to speak. So you start off with console emulation at the very beginning. You can also run tape emulation, but ultimately, if you're trying to recreate how an analog recording session works, you're going to be hearing that sound initially from the band through the microphones into your console out to your speakers, right? So you're not hearing, like, as you're tracking it, you're not hearing the tape emulation, right? So I start off with just the console, and then from there, if the console has EQs built into it, then I'll use those. But if it's got a compression built into it, I'll use that. But other than that, I'll have a very limited set of EQs and compressors that I'll try to stick with throughout the mix. Primarily because when those components were built, they were built to sound good across the board, right? So, like, I guess a better way of saying that is they're built to be musical. So a lot of the EQ settings that you might have, they're limited to only a certain set of frequencies, right? But those frequencies were specifically chosen for them to be as musical as possible. So say you take an EQ that has a certain set of frequencies, right? That ranges all the way from the low end of the frequency range to the high end of the frequency range that you can adjust. You use that same EQ on the bass guitar as you do on the electric guitar, on the lead guitar. Then what you'll get is on both of those, they're attenuating or boosting frequencies that musically sound good together, if that makes sense.
Right.
Whereas inversely, if you were to use something like digital graphic EQ, like the kind where you see people moving the little dots around and it moves the curve of the EQ, that has way more functionality to it. But at the same time, it leaves room for you to be adjusting things that don't need to be adjusted, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So that's really where like the analog recording process really helps to make things a little bit easier. And that's why a lot of people are still using analog gears, because they're made to sound musical instead of having to craft that sound entirely yourself, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%. To bookend that, Chase, and you broke it down pretty well, where one of the seminars during the NAMM session, it was a coveted producer. I'll pull up his info, but he was basically saying, with respect to the mixing board and all those presets, what you described is he wished some of that, he said, just use this, because everyone gets so hung up on, looking at, looking at the board or looking at the, and the litmus test, again, to thread the needle from a sync perspective. And I'll repeat these nuggets because they're timely and they're important. But Melanie Mitchell was bringing up, anytime you have a snap or a clap or a high end, something in the higher end frequency, making sure that mix and master is really dialed in, because that can compete with the dialogue of an actor. It could distract. And if that happens, the supervisor's not going to pick your cut because it clashed what's happening with the dialogue. Same with I'm sure you can relate, right, Chase? Who is it? I think it's DJ Khaled. That air horn. Anytime that something's really stand out. So what are those? So use it sparingly, and then obviously make sure the mix is dialed in.
Yeah, I mean, in what I do on my own tracks, I try to make sure that everything's working toward the same goal. So that applies to the lyrics of the song, the chords of the song, the groove, the melody, as well as the elements of the production. You know, how much of the drums to put in there, how compressed should they be? Do I want something that's really punchy sounding, or do I want something that's a little more intimate and nuanced? When it comes to, you know, throwing stuff that's really in your face in there, you'll want to make sure that that's what that song calls for. If you're doing a real like intimate sounding song and then it's got some real in your face stuff, well, that might speak to a certain artistic narrative, right? But it may be difficult to find placements for it, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, and to thread the needle, because what's good points there, and then we'll play some cuts and do what we did last time. There's a current ad coming up for Easter. It's a Kohl's ad, and it's a family. They're all dancing, trying on clothes in the dressing room, and they're dancing to a disco house track by Stardust called "Music Sounds Better with You," and it's a 30-second commercial. But that track was huge back in the day, and it was kind of in the lane of Daft Punk as well. But I bring that up because that's a track that when it was out, played at the raves, played at the clubs. And then the creatives for Kohl's did a brilliant storyboard of that, of the hook with that track. And it's a family having fun, breakdancing, trying on clothes, and they're talking about a sale. But again, the overall, you know, lane or nuance there is, if you write a piece of music that's authentic, has a vocal hook, has a production hook, and it's cohesive together, that has the potential to be synced up to picture, depending on what you're pitching to. So wanted to share, you know, some music. And before we do that, same thing with your cuts, Chase, with an eye toward the Black Keys. Is that something you're still playing with in as far as future cuts?
Absolutely. I think the Black Keys, as far as retro music revival is concerned, Black Keys really laid out a very constructive model to work off of. You know what I mean? Not just musically, but also how they presented their artist brand as a package, and how they construct the songs that they make to emulate that classic American music sound without feeling contrived and overdone.
100%. And with that, to thread the needle, I was going to play some cuts, because we meet twice a month with cohorts from our Patreon group, songwriters, Chases in the group, producers, and we craft original cuts with sync in mind. And as far as songs that fit into a certain era or genre, was going to play from up north, Don Brady. He produced a cut with Nor, Kin for Life, that included a feature from KRS-One. The track's called Space Rocket, and this is the remix. So I'll play it, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I just bought a space rocket, yeah, and I'm about to take. You know we had to hit you with a remix, right? Even ask me what up, Don? Yeah, I'm just trying to find my paradise. We having a party on the M1, about to cross over like it's M1. Professor with these bars had a crowd saying, "Damn, son, we so high that we blocking out the damn sun." I couldn't find my paradise, and so I had to plan one. Beyond celestial, magnetic spectacle, faster than a speeding bullet, 200 decibels. Popping bottles of Mars, gotta try with me, and you better bring some oxygen, planning to fly with me. And I don't see no limits for real, got the sky with me, and I got some space cadets that's ready to ride with me. So think twice before you hop on my ship, and all my haters you can hop off my woo. I just bought a space rocket, and I'm about to take off to the sky. Don't even ask me where
cool. Couple minutes clips there of Space Rocket the remix, and Dom Brady, to set it up, prior to joining our Patreon group, and also went through our Sync Like a Pro Academy. He had produced some cuts with Bootsy Collins, Twista, and then this one featured a feature with KRS-One from Boogie Down Productions. But Dom's overall vibe of the retro groove R&B throwbacks to hip hop, to DJ Quick in the 90s, and then Norkin from Live, she's from New York. But as far as production, and like if you hear that cut, Chase, where does that take you as far as time and place goes?
Man, that is like straight in the wheelhouse of, I feel like, early 2000s R&B pop kind of stuff. Like I'm struggling to put a name to an artist that I'm hearing in that right now, but yeah, very much in that like early 2000s hip hop R&B scene. Be perfect for that.
What's old is new again. I mean, but yet, and I think, from the Sync perspective, we've talked about it in the past, but it's worth underscoring, is a sense of familiarity, but yet with a new twist. And, that's something, that innovation, that pioneering mindset, if you will, is what's going to push the needle forward. Because sync agents, music supervisors alike, we're looking for a twist on things, but yet, depending on what the creative calls for in a scene, you have to be grounded sometimes in the present day, but yet if it's a flashback scene to, like you said, 2000, this cut could totally work. And I almost feel the remix a couple notches slower. The original had even more energy. But yeah, good assessment there, and props to Don Brady and Kin for Life on that cut. And was going to take another spin on, and these are artists in our workshop Patreon group, and Jess Meilman, who we've been working with for a minute, has a cut called Pessimist, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I don't know, Dad. What if his fear of losing me actually makes him lose me?
Yes, girl. Don't worry about that, because when it's the right guy, whether it's him or not, he is never going to let you go.
Wish I was a pessimist. It's been a year, 7 months, babe, since I sat in your lap and you showed me all your photographs that you snuck with me while I'm not. Can't forget that one birthday. You pulled me close at the party. You had teary eyes. Said you'd love me till we die. But maybe I was wrong to think you meant it when you called me home. Maybe words don't mean nothing, and love just leaves a stain you can't get out. Think I'm in trouble now. Tell me, how can I move on? And all I want is you to say, not trying again was a big mistake. Tell me, how can I move on when I'm home?
All right, so great cut there. Love is Blind, rom-coms, all the love reality shows. But for me, piano and the drum track in there bringing elements of Alicia Keys, and with Jess's vocals, radio friendly. Back when I was doing radio promo, I could hear this cut at radio, and this kind of reminds me, Chase, of like what you were talking about, those two lanes, tracks to go out here in the club. This is track you're chilling at home, you're in the car, and it's just got that groove, just the smooth vocals over the top there. but loving this tune and very sync friendly. And to thread it before I turn the mic to you, Chase, is, Jess is speaking about a love interest tune, and what was key there, she's not naming, the name of that person, because if she did, that in itself would be tough for sync, because then that would require the character on screen to have that same name. So very, nuance there, and Jess checked off the boxes in that respect. But what were your feels on that cut, Chase?
Yeah, definitely fully agree with all of the points you just made. I also noticed particularly how everything in this song is functioning perfectly to create that introspective, reflective kind of vibe. Down to the kind of beat that she's using, the lyrics that she's choosing to use, and the point of view that she's writing it from. Also, the melody that she's incorporating is very like internal thought, internal monologue. Very. It doesn't feel like a conversation necessarily. It feels like a conversation with yourself, which is beautiful.
Yeah, good insights there, and that little setup there with, she's sort of having that chat with her dad about this relationship, and then it goes into the track, and that was a cool way to set things up, and good insights, because like you said, you're looking at not only the lyrics but then the instrumentation and then the melodies, and like you said, is it fully cohesive to sync up to a given scene that might require that narrative on screen. And the last cut we're going to share is another cut that was produced by Dom Brady, and this time with the vocalist LA-based Monica Young, with a track called Honestly.
If I'm really being honest, maybe I've been lying to myself so time. Am I really being selfish? Tell me. Thinking you'd always be mine. But these paper walls we built so high, crumbling down over time. Glass hearts held too tight, shattered us, caused the divide. Honestly, I knew. Honestly, I knew it. I've been lying to myself. Honestly, I've been lying to myself. Honestly, I've been lying to myself.
All right, so I'll turn the mic to you, Chase, on this one. But yeah, what's your takeaways from a sync perspective on this cut?
This one, it really speaks to honestly hear like an ending sequence on this one in some ways, because it's very much like we were talking about in the last track. It's very introspective and reflective, but it has that extra layer of yearning and I don't want to say agony, but just that extra level of emotion to it that makes it more less of a lonely introspective and more of like two people on opposite sides of the door that, you know, one refuses to open it, one refuses to knock, so to speak.
The delivery of Monica's vocals, you're right. It's sort of like anguish. It's very, yeah. And I think, you know, I saw a clip the other day and it came across my feed, and it really heightened and accentuated and ties in what you're saying there, Chase, is, you know, the job of a vocal coach to work with an artist where to really pull out that emotion, and rather than, hey, let's substitute through instrumentation, a snare, a kick drum, or synth riff to create that nuance, but let's use that voice as that instrument. And I think, you know, kudos to the depth of Monica's, you know, delivery there, because like you said, correct, you know, same with if you were an actor working with a director and they're like, hey, we got to feel it, you know, give me that emotion. And just curious, you know, you've been performing for a minute now, but vocal coaches when you were coming up, or have you ever worked with a vocal coach, and what's your advice there to indie artists who that's something that might be on their checklist?
Yeah. Well, I've definitely worked with vocal coaches. I've had a handful of them, at least a few of them that really made the difference in how I'm doing what I'm doing. A lot of it comes down to technique, you know, because the voice is an instrument like any other instrument. And if you've ever, you know, heard middle school marching band, there's a reason why they don't sound like, you know, a military marching band or a college marching band. It's because, like a wind instrument, if you're not using the proper technique, you might get a note to come out. That note might also be on pitch, but does it have the timbre that you're looking for? Does it have the impact that you're looking for? That all comes down to the mechanics of how the vocal operates, because it's not, for example, like if you're wanting to do like real high pitched powerhouse vocals, like, you know, Robert Plant or Whitney Houston, it's not about just brute force pushing the notes up there. There's a very reserved and controlled way of achieving that, so to speak.
The breath control, it's interesting because, you know, over the years I've been training, you know, for fitness wise, and with, you know, boxing, just for, you know, not sparring, but I was hearing about a jazz player or trumpet player who, you know, after he trained and did boxing, his breath control got better, because like you said, being able to control that is, and it's not easy. And when you're trying to sing and then also sustain your breathing, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting because musically it can feel like it's very out of control, but it takes an extra amount of control to achieve that. You know what I mean? Like, for example, look at what, like, all the stupid fast licks that like Eddie Van Halen used to play and all that. Like, that's not just random chaos tapping his fingers all over the fretboard. It's precise movements that have been repeated over and over so that he can control it in such a way that it's clean.
Yeah. Hours of practice, and that's, maybe we'll save that for a future episode, but that you know, I think now with technology, you know, it's been said before, you know, there's no substitute for the creative. You can have all the gear in the world in your studio, but it's how you use that gear. Similarly, with crafting, you know, lyrics for the sync lane, whether it's authentic, whether your songs speak to the needs of a scene, a certain period, and those are things we'll touch on future eps. And the goal with the playbacks is to share real songs that we're pitching And we'll also do a postmortem because our buddy Matt Nashville from FU's and also The Love of People in Chicago, we synced them up in a couple episodes in the past of Shrinking. We could play those cuts and talk about why they worked. And we'll have to have Matt on this show because I know he did a killer cover of Helter Skelter.
Yeah. No, I'm very excited about that one. Yeah. He's a great artist, musician. He, like me, he's producing it all himself and is ever striving for that full live band sound. And I think he's one of those cats that really achieves that well. It's not a very easy thing to do.
100%. Always delivers. And with that, subscribe, hit that like button, post those comments below. If you guys have sync questions, we'll answer them in future episodes and also on our IG lives. Appreciate you guys. Catch you on the other side. Namaste.
Go.